Nordboard hamstring testing system by Vold Performance is the fastest, easiest and most accurate way to field test your athlete's hamstring strength. All the athlete has to do is get on board, hook their ankles in, lean forward and resist falling as long as they can, then catch themselves when they can't hold any longer. To get yours and get on board, contact Vold Performance now.
G'day and welcome to the Global Sport Coach live stream. We're proudly brought to you by Fit College up on the Sunshine Coast, Ocean Performance Centre and Suncoast Fitness. Today we've got Dr. Andy Walshe with us. He's the High Performance Director at Redbull. He's had a lot of experience pushing people's boundaries, finding people's limits and finding where he can increase their performance. So we'd just like to say thank you for coming along and taking time to be a part of our first live stream.
No, thank you, man. Thank you very much.
And so you're on a break at the moment from LA. You're back over here in Australia. Mm-hmm. So what have you been up to so far?
As little as possible. I just brought my two daughters down for a bit of a break. So just relaxing, enjoying the North Coast right now. So no real agendas other than sort of catching up with a few friends and family. Yeah.
So a bit more about your background. You started off and did some human movement at university, and you were a PE teacher as well. Mm-hmm. So you used that sort of experience to then get closer to higher elite level athletes. Was that mainly through your coaching network that you established?
Yeah, I think so. I think the original conversations were always around helping people, and the coaching background was actually a sort of unexpected benefit in that framework of learning how to coach as a PE teacher and all those different sports. Yeah. It's mostly about planning and organising and sort of structuring things, especially for those younger groups, and that sort of just rolled up into the elite programs as we got more and more involved. And at that time, it was relatively sort of a growth area in Australia. Summer Olympics coming online in a few years in 2000. So it was sort of part of that sort of push forward, and that was, the basis of it was really found a foundation in the coaching.
Mm. And so you were involved with the national drive to get the Australian Olympic team to do really well at the Sydney Olympics. What was that? How did you get brought into the fold there?
I mean, the programs were already going and hard and pushing, and at that point I was sort of still growing through the sort of graduating my degree, and I got involved with some of the winter sports programs back then, and then did some sort of basically just advising, sort of consulting stuff around for different programs, swimming, track and field, things like that. And the Institute was really pushing hard at that time. So it was just a great community of people that sort of we started to get to know each other, and everyone was sort of pushing right directly towards that summer program with the funding and everything. Mm. I wasn't directly involved like the big programs, 24/7, but I was lucky enough to sort of be caught in the sort of wake of it all and sort of learn a lot from those communities as they were developing programs and watching them. Back in the day, Alan Hahn and all the work he was doing down at the Institute, it was really fun to see and be part of, and that really was a sort of a nice kickstart to where I was heading.
Mm. And so you seem to get headhunted a lot by the sounds of it. Your work tends to spread out amongst the community and people give you calls for jobs. Is that, you don't actively look for new stuff? Or?
I think it's always timing. I think it's mostly what it comes down to, luck and timing. And sort of as the Australian program was investing heavily in that sort of sport performance models and building them in that time, I was part of that group, and then as that sort of started to grow across the sort of world, and other countries started to sort of see that opportunity that could happen by investing in performance platforms. It was just there wasn't a lot of us around at that time per se, and it was sort of a growing industry in the States and in Europe. And so I started to found myself just getting a few calls and starting to. And I was always really open to just taking on new challenges. So I was heavily involved more in summer and surf lifesaving here at Lennox and working in those programs. And then sort of winter sports came up as an opportunity, and I just thought it'd be a nice thing to learn. And I think that by putting yourself out there and sort of taking a chance and learning these new sports, you start to sort of get connected to other communities. And just one thing led to another. And so I got recruited into the Salt Lake program through the US Winter Olympics movement through ski and snowboard. and then that just sort of grew from there.
And you mentioned that you watched a lot of skateboarders fail continually, and that inspired you to push forward with certain projects. Do you get the same sort of thing in the snow, seeing the guys stack over and over and over again, trying the same thing?
Yeah, back in the day when I first started the program, especially the Australian winter program, it was, they were really up and coming. So there was a lot of, the guys were really pushing hard. And so there was a lot of challenging moments on the mountain. And then, as snowboard was adopted as a program, and that progression was really aggressive and fast. And we saw a lot of that sort of more... I think it's more of a community sort of approach, sort of get themselves up there, self-organise at the top of the half pipe and sort of throw themselves down. And again, a lot of wrecks and things. And as I moved into the action sports world with through Redbull, we started to see that same conversation happening. The athletes were pushing themselves independently very hard. The community was really supportive of that attitude of, taking a chance and sometimes pulling it off, sometimes not. And that really was a good awakener for us in terms of how we framed up a lot of our programs, because we've gotten really, really heavy with the science, and that had shown a lot of benefit. And then it was like, hey, also remember that there's some fun to be had here, and there's also the element of just pushing the edge a little bit and without knowing necessarily how the science will work out. So we just sort of blended the two worlds, and I think that's where we are today.
And so when you first got involved with Red Bull, there wasn't a big staff there. Can you run us through what it was like working at Red Bull when you first started?
It was fun. It was challenging. I took the job really against the sort of advice of everyone I spoke to, because they said, action sports at that point didn't have the profile that they do today. And also Red Bull being heavily focused as a brand, a media and marketing brand. And they really didn't have a formalised performance framework at all. So it was just sort of, hey, come in and get the thing going again, which is kind of the same model I'd started back at with the US Winter and Olympic and ski and snowboard program. So it was sort of a bit of deja vu walking in there the first day and sort of, all right, how do we build this from the ground up? But I always find that part really exciting, because that you can kind of frame up models and put processes and programs in place that typically aren't, you've got freedom to move and to experiment a little bit in that space.
And what's it like having to grow a team and be able to sort of separate yourself from all of the operations and hand tasks over? I know that can be challenging for a lot of people. What advice would you have in that area?
Yeah, it's a great challenge. I think it's tough at first, because if you grow these things up and you're part of the original group that gets it going, there's a lot of pride, and obviously a lot of hard work goes into it, and you kind of feel sort of sense of attachment to it. But you also realise along the way that you'll only take it so far, and what you probably can bring to the table at that point in time is helpful and important for where it's at. But again, to evolve it and make it sort of better than what it can be, where it currently is, you've got to really let it go. And that seems to manifest itself for us naturally. You kind of find yourself at a point where you realise the group under you are smarter than you are, and they're actually doing things and pushing the envelope, probably like you did 10 years ago. So you sort of just, at that point, I find myself just need to get out of the way, let it go.
And so the interesting thing about the extreme sports is that it wasn't quite as formal as traditional sports in their support networks, and you guys noticed that, and you felt an obligation to try and help these guys. Is that what was going on partly with Red Bull when you were working with Extreme?
I think we are the thing that you sort of, if we realise straight away, is that no matter what sport, whether it's action or mainstream or something new, that the people who are good are really good, and they get good by a lot of hard work and a lot of experience and years of preparation. And when you sort of rolled into the action sports world, it was easy to say, hey, there's no formal systems in place. And in many cases that's true when you think about talent ID and development and coaches education and all that. But at the same time, you've got to recognise that they're performing at an extraordinary level, in many cases in conditions that are the sort of factors of risk and reward. They're high consequence, life and death in some cases. So they've adapted and learnt things potentially that you may have not seen before, and that's the approach we took. We realised we could probably bring a little bit of structure and potentially some sort of experience from our side to the table, but more importantly was sitting back and watching and learning from that community and observing and taking notes and really digging into what they had already developed. And it's fascinating how much even the mainstream sports we've dragged across from the action sports and vice versa, So it's a win-win.
And that was one of the questions a few of our coaches were asking was, how does the developments that you've made in the extreme high-end elite world sort of relate to some of the guys doing, junior comps and junior athletes and things like that? What can they get out of watching you guys at Red Bull and that sort of thing?
Well, I think it's also important, to recognise that even in the current program, there's also a lot of mainstream athletes in the program. So, as I said, they tend to learn from each other. Well, I think a lot of the coaches, a lot of surprise, they sort of realise when they get involved and see it for the first time, again, how much dedication and preparation that goes into these sort of communities, even though they're not, traditionally recognised like that. I think some of the lessons that have been taken away, and this is coming from coaches who come and observe our training and that, they're like, oh my God, these guys are having a lot of fun. Number one, they really still have that element of play, which I think is really important to bring back to life. I mean, I think we've all run the trap of lining up the athletes and drilling them because we think that's the fastest way to get somewhere. But as you grow and learn, you sort of see that has limited benefit at a certain point. So I think fun's really important. I think, again, their ability to work right on the edge of failure, they push hard, and the sports are progressing fast in many cases. So they are willing to go out there and take a chance and make a mistake. And I think, again, that there's a time and place for all that, but I think that's something that they're really the system and the community is really supportive of, and I think that's something that has benefited a lot of the more mainstream programs. And I think in general, when you're watching the passion they have for what they do, which is similar to any elite talent, there's a lot of community out there, and there's a lot of solidarity amongst them. And what we typically do is put the communities together, so the mainstream, the action, other elite performance communities, and we just get them all talking and working together. And it's amazing what they'll pick up from each other. So in many cases, we sort of get out of the way and let them do the teaching of each other.
And so you do a lot of sort of boundary pushing work when you're working with those groups, and I guess a lot of that has to do with fear. How do you have to keep, I guess, your breaking point tests a secret to the athletes so they know that they're not part of a failure test? Because I've always found that interesting. And if you know that you're being pushed to breaking point, you'll go, oh, okay, I know what this is about. Do you have to keep it a secret?
In many cases, we keep it a surprise, but that's more about sort of dislocating expectations. Some of the challenges we find at the very top level is that it's very hard to push them further in that particular field. I mean, you can't, recreate a World Cup final. You can't, generate a fake 100-metre final in the Olympics. It just doesn't happen. Even if you do everything exactly the same, they know it's not real. So that being the case, and then again, also some of our sports, that edge is dangerous. So pushing them further and further in those fields, you do run up against a high risk factor. So we've just found it really powerful at times to say, hey, one of the best skills to have as a top talent is to be prepared for the unexpected, to be able to roll and sort of under adversity make decisions, dependent on what you're trying to achieve. Understand where you are right now, where you're trying to go. You may have a setback, you may have a failure, someone may change the rules on you at the last moment, things like that. And so a lot of that sort of secret kind of training is more about just bringing them up against scenarios that are unexpected, and that just forces a kind of different adaptation. Not everything's secret, sometimes they know it's coming, and they all know that we're going to probably go physically or mentally pretty hard, but it's one thing to know it, it's a different thing to live it. And so when we do that, we try and do it in such a way that it's a surprise. There's a lot of learning around that surprise, and there's a lot of coaching in sort of preparing them for that. So that's sort of the model.
And so you've worked with the military to combine some of the military training with some of the Red Bull experiences. how did you get involved with the military, and what sort of work have you done in that field at all?
It was funny. It was back in the early days of the winter program, the ski and snowboard program. We were lucky we were training in San Diego at Chula Vista. And at that time, there was a great relationship with some of the special operations community based there. And we were able to just go over and participate in some training. It was a lot more relaxed back then for a number of reasons. And we started to share what we were doing in terms of training. They were sharing some of their techniques. And so that just grew and evolved to different sort of groups and communities over the years. And so we all, I think, especially in the action sports community and some of the operational communities, there's that high risk, high consequence sort of stage that they have to operate in. So there's a lot to be learned. So we've just kept the lines of communication open, and we share a lot of different techniques and tools. And some things they do very, very, very well. Other things we do differently and have a fresh approach to. And when you bring the sort of two communities together, there's a lot to be gained. And mostly just through different training models and different training techniques and some of the new technologies and things.
So you're not tinkering away building super soldiers or anything?
Yeah, I think their goal is to be the top of their game, and our goal is with the communities we work with is to be the same. And there's all sorts of models and approaches, and one thing they're staggeringly good at what they do in some of those communities, and anyone who's that good at something there's something to be learnt from. So and there's parts of it that are just one of the original officers told me there's not a lot to be gained about talking about what we do with all the different groups. So it just it is what it is.
You've got some confidentiality agreements. You've got
I think it's just respect for each community, and they some of those communities have tough jobs and doing things right at the edge, and it doesn't benefit many people to sort of talk about it. But you definitely learn a lot about big stakes, big environments, and preparation and planning and execution. Some of the things they're really good at.
Yeah, so their consequence of failure is obviously death. So you learn a lot from that side of things from them.
Yeah, and some of the communities, the action sports world, it's they push pretty hard, and sometimes things don't work out as well there. So there's same sort of consequences. So those have been the basis of many of the conversations. It's sort of really when people are really putting it out there. How do we do the very best we can to support them in the best of ways, and are there tools and techniques that we can apply that make that mitigate the risk to the highest level.
And so applying some of your theories and models, have you worked with many business people in recreating some of their biggest fears and pushing their boundaries? And what's it like dealing with the consequence of, say, losing a ton of money? So how do you recreate the situation where their biggest fear is losing that deal or losing a project and that sort of consequence? It's the
same process as all the other, and the way we kind of think about it, losing a lot of money, it'll feel, especially if you're responsible for a lot of people, it's a tough scenario. It's not life or death per se, but the people will talk about it like it feels like they wish they were dead, and that's their words, not mine. And I think that just reflects on the idea that the consequences are really high, and the load that they put on as a performer in that field, the load that you or the value attribute to that success is high, and when you don't get it right, it's challenging. So we use a lot of the same techniques, in fact, almost identical techniques and processes that we use across all the different communities. And the fact that they are, on the boardroom, on the floor of the stock market, things like that, is sort of secondary to the idea that they're also putting themselves out there, they're taking big risks, and they're challenging themselves. And it feels like they're on the edge to them, which they are. And that's the sort of model that we try and develop.
And so you interact with them frequently, or it's not such a big part of your world?
Oh, now and again we do different programs and we have different conversations about it. I mean, between the sort of work we do with the sort of Redbull Community, the other stuff sort of that takes up most of the time. So there's little opportunities here and there, but again, there's a lot to be learned. those high performers in the business sector are one of the communities we do pay a lot of attention to in terms of learning, because again, their approaches and their skills and what they've developed to get that good at that particular craft is a very much a value proposition. And again, it's funny when you get a room full of, say, elite, and I say it's across all the different fields, from music, sports, military, business, the conversations are far more similar than they are different. In fact, it's almost like they're all coming to the same conclusion in many ways, and they're past the tactical idea of getting better at that craft. They're at that point of, hey, how do I really push myself as a human and what I'm trying to achieve there.
And so that sort of leads into your, I guess, focus on Eastern philosophies. You do reference a lot of the Bushido code and things of that nature, where it's not so much about focusing on the mastery of the technique, but self-reflection. What drove your interest into the Eastern philosophies?
Well, I think there's always, again, like I said, everyone's got something to offer, and the idea was that when we're just looking across talent as a general sort of topic, there's a few communities that have been working on things for thousands and thousands of years, and you can go there, sort of the traditional owners, the Aboriginal community in Australia, and some of their lessons and teaching. You look at the Eastern philosophies, because they had I think it's very well documented, as well as it's they did tie a lot to the warrior concept early on. But again, the Native Americans, the Southern Americans, there's all those communities who spent thousands of years, if not tens of thousands of years, perfecting a community based around performance principles of taking care of each other, being being vigilant, being aware of your community, being aware of your surroundings, all those things that we think about when we're talking about elite athletes as per se. And I think we just naturally said, well, that's already been done. Why reinvent that wheel? Go back and just let's adopt some of those techniques and principles, and it's just another tool in the kit. And it was for certain developmental programs that we were looking at, some of that self-reflection and sort of mindfulness work that's built out of some of the Eastern philosophies was really a powerful tool, and still is a powerful tool.
So sometimes it gets results that you're not really expecting. So the self-reflection will show its benefits in other areas. Are there any examples of that you found quite interesting?
I think we always look at it from a perspective of, better at sort of who you are, and then better at what you do. And I think at the very top level, that becomes a conversation, because they're as fit as each other. They're usually got the same sorts of experiences, equipment's kind of leveling out. There's always little advantages here and there, but ultimately it seems to be those people that have a really good sense of themselves and can manage themselves under a range of conditions that seem to have the opportunities. I mean, it gives them maybe a competitive advantage. So at certain points, I think we say, hey, look, let's really see if we can round this whole program out and work on them as people first, and then, of course, there's technical and tactical things they have to develop, but it's just another part of the puzzle, I think. So it's just one that we find is important, especially, again, as you get to that very, very top community, where there's not a lot of separation amongst the sort of performers. You're always looking for these other areas to build an advantage. And I think also naturally it sets people up, if we get those sorts of programs right, for sort of post whatever career they have in that performance frame. And that's always a powerful tool, because I think that allows them to then sort of move and transition out of whatever they're doing currently into that next phase. And if we do that well, then they typically are great advocates for a program, and also in terms of mentoring and coaching that next generation. It's a really powerful framework to have.
And so that sort of sparked a few thoughts. What's it like pushing people's boundaries for quite a while? Is it something that you have to be really careful of for their longevity after the sport and what they're going to do career-wise when they're finished?
Yeah, I think everyone sees the highlight reels and thinks about how pushing hard and sort of driving these people. And I think it's a little hard to see the context at times. So the context is always one of support. There's always a lot of training and preparation that we put in place We either do it right before as part of the development or training for that particular training evolution, or we do it, let them see how they went, and then give them the tools, and then redo it, see how they can adapt. And it's just a teaching model, difference in teaching model. I think we always are very cautious of how far we are driving or how hard we're pushing, in such that we don't, one, physically hurt, because that's obviously doesn't make any sense, but also more that they feel like they're getting it's a growing and a development framework that they're within, versus a sheer just kick the hell out of them. Because I think just throwing them up against something tough and hoping that they do well doesn't give you the sort of framework of development and the skills that you definitely need to sort of thrive under that state. So I think we're always conscious of, hey, we don't, we push hard, we want to see a point where things aren't working out, and that's just so we know what to work on. But once we get there, we're always like, okay, let's retrace those steps. What do we need to prepare? How do we prepare better? How do we educate and support them? And I think if you go that route, you can always, there's sort of a lot of room, and they're naturally good at what they do. So you've definitely got to put a lot of thought and effort into that part of the program.
Mm-hmm. So this is probably a tough question, but what has been your biggest failure as part of these projects, and is it hard for you to fail as well in front of people, or do you build that into your process and go, okay, I expect this to happen, so maybe I can get away with it?
I think, like everybody, you don't want to fail. It's just a natural thing. But I think you also understand when you make a lot of mistakes, which as you get older you realise that. I think that you just recognise that is part of the learning. Now, it's easy to say after the fact. At the moment of it, it's always like, damn, I coulda, shoulda, woulda. Our couple of big challenges in the early days for us were pushing really hard in a couple of the action sports communities, and these are just examples. And training environments were getting aggressive, and we pushed a little hard, and we had a couple of accidents. We had a fire in some of our foam pits that we're using, and no one got hurt, luckily. But it was and so per se as a failure, it was like, we pushed. We could see that we were challenging the edge probably a little too hard, and so we pulled back from that to make sure that we weren't sort of putting anyone in harm's way. So I think personally, those sorts of things over the years, those sort of moments where you kind of get a little bit ahead of yourself, those are the moments I reflect on as sort of failures that we sort of say, oh gosh, we've got to learn from this, we've got to move forward, but we can't be always just pushing. We've got to be a little bit more thoughtful about it. So that's one example. I mean, there's hundreds of them, but that's one of the ones that stuck with us because the natural tendency was just to go and go and go. We got a little ahead of our game at that point.
Is there any sport in particular that you've worked on that is incredibly more risky than the others, that has more colourful outcomes? The obvious ones you can always talk about are the sort of big mountain, big wave stuff, and but I think those. I mean, risk is all in the definition, and I think it's just risky to put yourself out there, no matter what the sport. That sounds like a bit of a generic answer, but even watching the Olympics right now, you can see the challenges that sort of people are coming up against, and you can see how much work and preparation's gone into it. And you think about it, you've maybe trained 8, even 10, 12 years in some cases to be on that stage, and it's hard, and it's everyone wants to be on the podium, and not everyone's going to be on the podium, and there's a you've just got to get out there and throw it all in, and probably count back on your own training and preparation. So I think that risk in itself is maybe not as sexy as the sort of jumping off a mountain or wingsuiting or something, but it definitely, I think, is a mark of a real talent, is that they can put themselves out there, they back themselves right to the hilt, and they sort of let the cards fall where they may, and that in itself takes a lot of courage, and I'm always respectful of that, what we see in the talent we work with. Yeah, I mean, it could be incredibly tough to spend all that time preparing, and then your moment could be over in a split second, and then how do you deal with that, and then come back around for another crack and try it again? Yeah,
I think that's sort of the unsung thing of these sort of big moments, is that it can be a lifetime of work to get there, and it can be just that the other crew were better than you. It could be something went wrong, a piece of equipment broke, or it could be the weather, wind blew up and, just got a little headwind. Something like it just can be anything. And I think it's a real testament to these talents that they are able to, see it for what it is, and they bounce back. And I think many of us would find that a tough moment. I think I underestimate how resilient a lot of these people are. The fact that they do, again, they have the courage to put themselves out there, back themselves all the way, and that to me is the essence of why we're sort of all on this business. It's sort of part of the game.
Mm-hmm. And so some of your philosophies or ideas on nutrition as well are quite important, and how you treat your body. Also, I found interesting was that instead of trying to enhance things constantly, you were talking about just creating an optimal baseline to work from. Mm-hmm. Is that something you still continue to work from?
Yeah, I think it's all a spectrum for us, and I think you can think about it. You go from pathology on one end of the sort of human spectrum, so things aren't working or things are wrong, to sort of like wellness and healthy and getting things right, and then past that to sort of optimization. And I think in all the areas it requires to be a great performer, it's hard to be optimal in every field. And I think many of the cases, getting just good basics and fundamentals across the sort of portfolio of factors that are related to what you're trying to achieve is really, in itself, is tough enough. So I think even like nutrition is a great example. Just eating well and healthy, and especially with the travel and the load and all the rest of it that's on these guys and girls, I think that's a huge win. Then once you get there, if there's obviously other things you can do, just to, maybe there's some deficiencies in your diet or whatever you need to correct. But again, also got to keep in perspective how much across the portfolio of factors that are relevant to that performance, how important is, say, that nutrition element to you in that particular craft. And I think it's important to always keep that in balance. So spending 20 hours a week worrying about what you're eating is not helpful unless it requires that's half of what eating is half of what contributes to your performance. So I think we always, it's fascinating when we get sort of new developments or new expertise in a particular field, we kind of go a little heavy in that direction for a little while, and then realise that the extra work is not worth all the effort, and we kind of have to figure out where that optimal amount of management and sort of maintenance, if you like, is at. And when everyone's so time poor now, I think it's more and more important than anything to be balanced. And look, this is going to get us 90% of the way, and that's enough based on all the other factors, and having the confidence to be there versus, all right, everything has to be perfect here, because that seems to be that extra 10% always for the efforts doesn't seem to make the difference that we're after. Again, all relative to what you're trying to achieve and where you are in what particular field. But that's one of the, if we want to get it basically as a message, we want to get the fundamentals and the framework basically right across it all, and then think about how to optimize it past that.
And so then you use those as a profile for what the benchmark is in high performance. And so who are some of your star performers as your benchmarkers for the different sports?
Geez, I mean,
without having to
rattle off 20 names. I mean, I think, across all the different fields that we play in, the star performers, versus just dropping names, which it would be these people that are, number one, so passionate about what they do, and they, even after they've been involved for 10, 20 years in that sport, they still are, first out there. They're working hard. They still enjoy it enough to put in the effort. That's how I look at it. They're still having enough. They're getting enough fun and sort of love of it out of it, that the work probably doesn't seem as much as like work as it would to others. The other thing I also think that's a characteristic is they all are interested in always finding that next edge. So they're always like, the classic cliche would be a lifelong learner. They're always interested in what's next. How can I get a little bit better, or what can I focus on? And they don't there's no sort of apathy in their program. And I think that across all our sports is the characteristics that you see that sort of define it. They love what they do, and they're just always looking for that edge. And and that allows them to sort of, with a bit of talent, get there and become as extraordinary as they are.
So a lot of that passion and stuff comes from the mind, and you've got to balance that, your mental health with your physical health. So that's an area you're obviously incredibly passionate about. Can you tell us a bit more about what you actually do?
I think at the end of the day, it's all important. I think people break it down into mental and physical, which is kind of nice because it makes sense. It's easy to get your head around. Sorry, use that. But the idea really is that it's all part of the one system. And I think there's elements that you can train a sort of neck up, they say, and neck down. But at the same time, you've got the context of the entire system is the one that really is important. So, physical capability will probably give you, maybe a bit more confidence in some respects. Psychological capacity or ability to perform when it's sort of going tough allows you to be a little bit more relaxed, which enhances your sort of physiological reserves. So we've always treated it like that. Having said that, I think we've gotten there's a lot of work over the years. It's been measured a lot more simply and more effectively in many ways because it's just it's more quantifiable. The physical aspect of development is really, the science there is, we've got a lot of history and a lot of experience there. As the kind of qualitative assessments of the sort of psychological piece, the behavioural piece, it's always been a little bit more nuanced because of the nature of it. And as we start to get into fMRIs and scans and all that, we're starting to see patterns, but I think we're a little behind there. So I think there's a bit more opportunity to think about in how to frame up a model in that space that gives us the same sort of resolution that we get in the fidelity we get in the physical space. So we've been spending a lot of time working with different institutions on brain scans of the athletes, looking at sort of real-time brain recordings under different scenarios, things like that to try and get a better sense of what's going on there. So, and then we know experientially that we can create as scenarios that challenge you in that regard, which have been done for many, many years very successfully by all sorts of communities. So we also use those, and I think the onion's slowly being peeled back in that space, and we're starting to learn more. And then you now start layering onto it things like genomics and biomics, gut biome and things like that, which are showing all these interrelationships between it all. And you think you're getting closer to a solution as you sort of peel it back, but it seems like it just gets more and more complex. So that's why we're so fascinated paying attention to that space.
So it's like universes in a universe and keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah, some of the more recent things I've been privy to see across some of the different research communities, I'm like, oh my God, it's we really haven't a clue about what we're doing. And that's just in the context of there's so much more to learn. And when you watch it and you see what they're peeling back, again, the gut biome's a popular one now. It's been for several years, but sort of what they're learning every month, you seem to see some new piece of research coming up between how that's related to psychological performance, physiological performance. And honestly, I don't think they really have figured out anything definitively yet, but there's these trends and sort of smoke signals coming up. So it's like, as they unpack that one field, we're starting to see opportunities again. So, just when you think you're kind of getting closer to an end game, it's like, oh, here we go again, we've got to go back to the drawing board.
And has it been technology driving these innovations, being able to do more testing and do things more efficiently? Mm-hmm. Is that the main drive, or is it just some amazing creative minds in that field and just coming up with these things?
I think it's always both. I think the technology enables the creativity of some of these extraordinarily talented people. And across our programs, we always say, they're the people doing the heavy lifting for us. It's these different research communities and that are deeply engaged in their areas of expertise. And as the chips get faster and more powerful, the mathematics is enabled to be happening real time, and essentially the calculations and the algorithms are starting to look at patterns and things like you hear thrown out, deep learning and AI. They're starting to peel back these sort of more hidden and less obvious trends and models within the existing data, as well as creating new data. So I think technology is a massive enabler of the performance world, aside from the fact that you could invent something new that gives you a competitive advantage with equipment or something. But I think that's really enabled a new sense of sort of wonder in many respects. It's, again, how little we do know, but really as the acceleration of this technology is exponentially growing, we're starting to see that it's just filling in areas very, very quickly, and I think that's obviously the frontier, as everyone would say. It's the technologies I've seen coming down the pipe and with respect to human performance are going to be completely game changing in the next 5 years, and that's where it gets exciting. At the same time, daunting, because it's hard to keep up, and it's hard to separate those technologies which seem to add real value versus those which are a bit more marketing. But it's the whole thing is exploding together. So that's the sort of opportunity.
So is it almost an exponential sort of unlocking that you're talking about, these gains? That they're going from 50 to 100, not just cents here and there?
Yeah, I think that's going to be it. I think the exponentiality of the learning and understanding is going to be staggering. And I think we're seeing it already, and in certain areas. And again, I think the opportunity is that cutting out what's not real and what is real, sort of understanding what's really based on the research, but also having a little bit of poetic license to experiment on the edge of some of these things, because I think in cases the technology is accelerating so quickly, the research is not going to keep up. So it's hard to. It's always the classic model, you probably bank on 80% of what you're doing is sort of heavily research backed, but there's also that 10 to 15, 20% of there's enough smoke there to try it, and that's how you keep pushing the edge. And 1 out of 10 may work, but if that one works, then that gives you an advantage. Then you're good to go.
So what are some of the toys that you're enjoying working with at the moment?
Wow. I think the ones that we're seeing the most development in and the sort of acceleration across a lot of the neurotechnologies. To me, that is opening up windows into spaces that are still a bit of a mystery to us, and we're definitely across things like STEM and just sensing of neurofeedback, things like that. We're starting to see some real powerful trends in the research, and so enough, again, there's enough going on there to validate us getting involved. I think the other big one is sort of, I'd hate to throw out there, but I think because I think people suddenly go to recreating a sports scenario, like creating the Olympics virtually. I think that the technologies within VR that just enable us to push certain behaviours. So a good example is I saw a recent demo of just sort of slacklining or tightrope walking, and it was VR, and so you're standing on the edge of a cliff and you had to walk out, and it wasn't per se that you get better at slacklining, it was the fact that you had to overcome a certain trepidation and fear by that activity, that you had the opportunity to practice that skill. So I think the event itself is less important right now because of where the technology stands, and the opportunity to create scenarios that are interesting, exciting, that are new, that have a perception of risk that are really high but actually aren't. And if you can anytime you can create that scenario, I think there's an opportunity for people to practice skills. Because as much as you tell yourself, again, if you've been lucky enough to see these new tech, you can tell yourself that it's not real. When you're standing there, you got to get your head around the fact that it isn't. And that game itself it's an interesting mental exercise.
Yeah. So do you do any work with augmented reality as well, like overlaying things on things that are currently there? We
haven't yet, and we haven't even employed the VR techniques per se. We're just keeping sort of abreast of what's happening in the field and watching. I mean, some groups are. I mean, American football, there's a couple of companies out there that have pushed sort of rehearsal of plays, because that it's a set play. It starts, it finishes, and so just having the ability to sort of practice rehearsals and sort of learn movements like that. I've seen some interesting things there, but where the promise of it for us is not quite at the level we need for us to develop, but it's getting very, very close. And I think the VR world is going to generate new sports, so new sort of activities for people to participate in, and that layered on top of sort of the gaming sort of growth in the gaming environment, the esports world. Those two communities are going to invest in enough into that technology that in the next few years you'll see some real game-changing stuff there.
And so you focus on the gamers side of things mainly for their decision-making processes? Is that what interests you in the gaming world?
Again, back to our original chat, I think the idea that they're extraordinary at what they do, And if you ever watch these young esports performers, I mean, it's staggering, the sort of ability to take in that amount of information, because the pace of these games is staggering. Typically a lot of them compete in teams, so there's this sort of intra-team communication, and there's this synergy, so teamwork, and there's always a leader, so there's a leadership skill there. So you get basically into the same patterns of behaviour that you see in a lot of different fields, and again, they excel at certain elements. The ability to minimise distraction, the ability, again, to sort of focus in on what's important. So those skills, we're fascinated to learn how they do that, so that we can then transfer it across different communities. And that, to me, in just the sheer global investment in those, in the esports world, when you look at the numbers, means there's going to be some staggering developments there in the next few years, both from a training and also performance world. And so that's just you're just in our business, you can't leave any area untouched. So we're just, again, watching, learning, paying attention, and trying to figure out, again, what it is about these performers that makes them so good, and can we translate that across.
And it's also, I guess, the market that it captures as well is quite large, and being Red Bull is, using spectacle to promote the brand, but also give back in a way.
Yeah, I think understanding, again, recognising the talent for what they're doing is really part of the game, and again, as you say, the growth in that field, I think the estimates are in the next few years that they'll be sort of quote unquote, in terms of reach and exposure, some of the highest sort of level athletes in the world. So I think in numbers recently we saw a billion and a half people involved in some form of esports. I don't know how accurate that was, but that tells me that there's something going on. So I think people are starting to become aware of how big it is. And if you see any of the events and look at the numbers of people at these events and people streaming and watching real time, the numbers are staggering.
I guess they've got more of an argument to call themselves a sport then, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's, as I said, that everyone's got something to offer, and their particular skill and what they do is honed. I mean, the world champions have been doing it for 10 plus years. They practice, some of them 10 plus hours a day. I mean, it's a staggering investment in that particular craft. And you can argue, I think irrelevantly, whether it is or isn't particular like a traditional sport or not, but I think that misses the point of what they're actually achieving and how good they are at what they do.
So just wrapping up, you're here in Lennox for a while, but you're heading back over to LA. What's in store when you get back home?
Like everyone, probably just catching up on emails, and but I think there's always some new programs coming through, and we're in the phase now, sort of planning sort of next development for next year, and so when I get back, there's a lot of planning in terms of what's happening for 2017, and finally locking that plan in, and then and there's always something unexpected. You never know in sort of this many different fields. Someone will walk in the door one day with some new idea, and you're like, wow, I hadn't thought of that, and that's always the stuff that makes it exciting. So yeah.
So there's certain things you plan for and certain things you allow just to pop up and follow the rabbit hole. Yeah,
exactly, because I think that's the nature of many of these fields we're in now, is there's so many new opportunities, and the crew are pushing so hard in their respective fields that they're identifying ways to take it to another level. And like I said right at the beginning, most of the time we're just supporting that conversation with them in ways that they've already figured out that they need what they need to do to get there, and we're just sort of rolling in a little bit of support on the back end to make it help make it happen.
Well, I think we might wrap it up there.
Perfect.
But, we really appreciate you coming in and having a chat and spending an hour with us on our first ever live stream. So if you've got any comments or feedback, please let us know what you thought of it. And we've had a great time talking with Andy Walshe here from Red Bull. So
thank you so much. Cheers. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, mate.
Enjoy it. Thank you.
Cheers.
So the biggest thing for me that drew me to Fit College was the flexibility of the course. I still needed to work full time. I couldn't go and study full time, so having the part-time option was really cool. So I did a Monday and a Wednesday night, which was awesome. And then also from the minute I called to inquire, I felt like, they're actually here to help me. They called me back straight away. The good communication and being able to have support is the best thing.